Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's special compilation, we will revisit 6 shocking case files that once captured public attention and forced international law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI, to spend years tracking leads, all involving Vietnamese individuals overseas. Behind the facade of ordinary citizens lie horrific shadows and hidden criminal empires. We will step into the underworld of Queenpin Helen Nguyen, who ran an interstate drug marketplace called DIRTYRUGS from her own bedroom and expose the sophisticated 33 million USD money laundering network operated by Vinh Quang Phan and his wife in Texas. And that's not all. This video will follow the trail of the notorious underworld figure Tony Playboy in a bloody settling of scores in Houston, as well as the cross-border manhunt for Tyler Pham, who arrogantly believed he could escape the FBI's reach by fleeing back to Vietnam. Most notably, we will unpack the largest email theft in history, 1 billion emails carried out by Vietnamese super hacker Viet Quoc Nguyen, and fall silent before the heartbreaking tragedy of Truc Nguyen, a gentle nail technician who was unjustly killed by a stray bullet during a personal revenge attack. From high-tech conspiracies to blood-soaked underworld vendettas, each story is a costly lesson in greed, and the price paid before justice. Join Vietnamese Case Files as we pull back the curtain on these secrets right now. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese Case Files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. In the afternoon of January 30th, 1989, the Vietnamese commercial area in southwest Houston was suddenly rocked by sharp, rapid gunshots like a string of firecrackers. A restaurant employee, panicked and pale, sprinted out into the street, waving desperately for help. Luckily, a passerby stopped in time and used a nearby payphone to call the police. Just minutes later, police sirens echoed through Houston streets. When investigators entered the small restaurant, a Vietnamese-style banh mi shop, they fell silent for a few seconds at the chaotic scene before them. 2 bodies lay motionless on the floor, blood spreading into pools around toppled chairs. Nearby, 3 other victims, each of them wounded, were groaning in pain, struggling to hold on as they waited to be rescued. The acrid smell of gunpowder still hung in the air, mixing with the scent of coffee and half-finished food. Signs of violence were everywhere. Shattered display case glass, overturned tables and chairs, and food scattered across the floor. But there was no trace of the shooter. He was gone before police arrived. Once officers confirmed there was no immediate danger, they called for additional emergency responders. Ambulance sirens tore through the otherwise quiet afternoon, and the injured victims were quickly evacuated in critical condition. After that, police urgently sealed off the entire area, stringing yellow tape around the small restaurant as the investigation began. On the floor were the bodies of 2 Asian men lying motionless, both pronounced dead before paramedics could intervene. The victims had been shot at close range with fatal wounds to the chest and head that killed them almost instantly. Scattered around the scene were numerous small caliber shell casings, suggesting the attacker used a semi-automatic firearm and fired repeatedly. The dense clusters of bullet holes in the walls and glass display cases showed that the shooter had swept the space with gunfire. There were no signs of a struggle or physical altercation, suggesting the victims were attacked suddenly and had no time to react. Investigators also found several pieces of identification near the victims. However, the strange thing was that the names on those IDs did not match any resident lists or criminal records the police had on file. The IDs were likely fake, an approach not uncommon in some Asian criminal circles, where people use alternate identities to conceal their real age or prior record. Faced with that, police had to take fingerprints from the deceased victims to run database comparisons. While waiting for the results, they took statements from witnesses who were still trembling outside. A waitress, still visibly shaken, said that at the time of the shooting, the shop was fairly quiet, with only a group of Vietnamese young men sitting together in a corner. Suddenly, a few unfamiliar men appeared right at the entrance. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the gunshots erupted in rapid succession. Terrified, the employee dropped flat and hid behind the counter so she did not get a clear look at the shooter's face. Meanwhile, another witness outside said he saw a dark-colored car speed away immediately after the shots. Inside the vehicle were several Asian youths ducking low, trying to avoid being seen. These details further supported police's initial assessment. This was most likely a gang-style hit, involving at least 2 perpetrators and a getaway plan prepared in advance. However, early on, identifying the victims proved extremely difficult, because no witness dared to come forward to recognize them or provide specific names, likely out of fear of retaliation. Even the 2 survivors, after undergoing surgery to save their lives, maintained an eerie silence. They refused to cooperate with police and would not disclose their identities or any information about the attackers. With no cooperation, police had to rely on physical evidence and technical investigative methods. At the scene, they collected more than a dozen shell casings and sent them for ballistic testing. Results indicated the casings were most likely fired from a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, a type commonly circulating on the black market. However, the murder weapon was still not found. The forensic team also found faint, blood-stained shoe prints on the floor, likely left by the perpetrators as they fled in a hurry. The sizes suggested at least 2 people had stepped through that area. One wearing around a .40 and the other around a .42, matching the theory that at least 2 individuals took part in the escape. At that moment, the fingerprint comparison came back. The results showed that both deceased victims had records in the police system. One had been detained the previous year for disorderly conduct at a bar in Houston. The other had been arrested for illegal weapons possession but later released due to lack of evidence. Their identities were confirmed as Minh Văn Nguyen and a man named Din. More notably, both men had ties to a Vietnamese gang called the Nomads, a notorious criminal organization in Houston linked to multiple armed robberies and internal retaliations. Once investigators confirmed the victims' gang connections, they decided to shift their approach. Quietly, they reached out to sources within the Vietnamese community, people who had secretly cooperated with police before. After several days of outreach, one name repeatedly surfaced in the statements. Tony Playboy, believed to be the leader of a Nomads faction in West Houston. Investigators immediately searched their database and found a file for Minh Du Tong Nguyen, 23 years old, living in Houston, previously suspected in an assault case but never charged due to insufficient evidence. Notably, the file explicitly listed his nickname as Tony. When investigators compared his photo to the limited witness descriptions, they believed they had identified the suspect's true identity. Minh Du Tong Nguyen, also known as Tony Playboy, was very likely the person behind and the mastermind of this sudden shooting. As soon as Houston police identified Tony Playboy Minh Du Tong Nguyen as the primary suspect, they launched an intensive manhunt. Investigators increasingly believed this was a gang hit, not only because of how decisive and brutal the attack was, but also because of long-standing, overlapping conflicts within the Nomads. In the weeks that followed, the team re-examined every detail. The 9mm shell casings recovered at the scene were entered and compared against the National Ballistics Database. The results showed that the gun used in this case had also appeared in another Houston shooting a few months earlier, tied to a brawl that left one person injured, but fortunately not dead. That earlier incident was also suspected to involve the Nomads, yet no one had been arrested. This lead further strengthened the theory that Tony and his associates were behind both shootings and that they had likely kept the same gun for use in multiple crimes. Around the same time, an unexpected development gave police a major boost. In early March 1989, Houston police raided a front gambling operation in the Bel Air area and arrested multiple suspects, including 2 Vietnamese youths who were close associates of Tony Playboy. Knowing it would be difficult to deny their involvement, they agreed to cooperate in hopes of receiving lighter treatment. In his statement, one of the 2 confirmed that Tony Nguyen was the organizer of the restaurant shooting. According to him, Tony believed Minh and Din's group deserved to be punished for insulting his honor and encroaching on his territory. The associate also admitted he took part in the plan, serving as the driver who brought Tony to the scene. However, he insisted that the person who actually fired the shots was Tony. This testimony marked a major breakthrough, as it was the first time police had a witness directly identifying the main suspect's role. Even so, authorities remained cautious because to secure charges, they needed additional independent evidence to strengthen the case, especially since the informant was also a criminal suspect and could be questioned for credibility. Realizing Tony may have already fled, Houston police quickly coordinated with the FBI to deploy special manhunt measures. Tony's file was entered into the federal wanted list and also forwarded to Interpol's system in case he attempted to escape abroad. Investigators believe Tony would likely rely on Vietnamese community networks scattered across the United States to hide. He could change his name, blend into heavily Vietnamese areas such as California or Louisiana, or even cross into Canada, which also has a sizable Vietnamese population. In addition, Tony's personal background showed he was Catholic, leading to a notable hypothesis. Police believed he might try to disappear into major Vietnamese Catholic gatherings, hiding among crowds of pilgrims. That theory directed attention to the Marian Days Festival, also known as the Vietnamese Marian Days, held every August in Carthage, Missouri. It is the largest Catholic festival for the overseas Vietnamese community, drawing tens of thousands of people from everywhere. And more than a few Vietnamese criminals had used occasions like this to find temporary refuge. Tony was very likely among them. So in August 1989, a joint task force from Houston Police and the FBI quietly arrived in Carthage during the Marian Days Festival. They brought Tony Playboy's wanted photos along with photos of several other Vietnamese suspects and discreetly blended in to observe a crowd of nearly 50,000 attendees. As predicted, during the festival days, surveillance teams noted the presence of a few familiar faces from the criminal underworld. On August 18th, 1989, police suddenly arrested Hung Van Chung, a Vietnamese fugitive wanted in connection with the murder of 3 people in Memphis. While taking Chung into custody, officers discovered that Tony Nguyen was also in the nearby area and had been with Chung shortly beforehand. However, Tony quickly sensed the danger. Taking advantage of the brief chaos, he slipped into the dense stream of pilgrims and vanished. Agents immediately gave chase through the sea of people, but Tony managed to escape. By the end of 1989, based on intelligence tips, Houston police contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and immigration authorities to warn them about Tony Playboy. They suspected he might be blending into large Vietnamese communities in Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal. An international alert went out, but the hunt on Canadian soil faced major obstacles due to jurisdictional limits. Throughout that period, Tony's whereabouts were almost completely unknown. He seemed to have disappeared from the United States, pushing the investigation into a temporary deadlock. In early 1990, a new path opened through the well-known TV program America's Most Wanted, hosted by John Walsh. Long seen as an effective bridge between law enforcement and the public. At police request, on January 14th, 1990, Tony Playboy's image and the story of his alleged crimes were broadcast nationwide across the United States. Just a few days after the episode aired, the hotline received a call from someone claiming to live in Toronto, Canada. The caller said he suspected a young man seen near Toronto's Vietnamese community area was Tony Playboy. According to the description, the man closely matched the wanted photo. In his 20s, Asian, slender build, with a faint tattoo on his arm. Notably, he lived very quietly, usually went out only at night, and appeared to have no stable job. The caller also provided the exact address of the apartment building where the suspect was staying. This information was quickly passed to Toronto police and the FBI. Not giving the target any further chance to escape, US-Canadian authorities urgently launched a coordinated arrest plan. On the night of January 22nd, 1990, Toronto police and US agents quietly surrounded the suspicious apartment complex and swiftly took the suspect into custody on the spot. According to a Canadian officer, when arrested, Tony was still carrying a handgun in his coat pocket. He also had a fake passport under someone else's name, believed to be preparation for fleeing to Europe if the situation became dangerous. After his arrest, Tony was held in custody in Toronto while awaiting extradition procedures back to the United States. He appeared cold and barely spoke. But perhaps deep down, Tony understood that every chance at freedom had closed on his life. Based on earlier investigative findings and statements from suspects, police confirmed that Tony Playboy's full name was Minh Du Tong Nguyen. He was about 23 when the crime occurred, Vietnamese, around 1 meter 80 tall, slender but notably quick and agile. Minh Duy immigrated to the United States as a child and grew up within Houston's Vietnamese community. According to criminal records, Minh Duy Tong Nguyen was known as aggressive yet highly cunning, always finding ways to evade police pursuit. The nickname Playboy came from his showy lifestyle, frequently wearing designer clothes, sporting gold chains, and tattooing the Playboy symbol on his arm. He was also known as a ladies' man, often surrounded by several girlfriends. Around 1988, Minh Duy Tong Nguyen joined the Nomads and quickly became someone who collected debts and punished rivals on the gang's behalf. Before the 1989 murders, Minh Du Tong Nguyen had repeatedly been suspected of involvement in criminal activity. Police believed he had helped plan at least 3 armed robberies targeting Chinese and Vietnamese restaurants in Houston, although they had not gathered enough evidence to prosecute. There were also rumors that Minh Du Tong Nguyen had shot and wounded a rival in a retaliation attack in 1988, but the victim survived and chose to remain silent, too afraid to identify the attacker. This reflected a common reality at the time, when many Asian criminals avoided accountability because victims and witnesses stayed quiet. Minh Du Tong Nguyen was also known for knowing how to erase his tracks. He struck only when he was confident police would have trouble tracing him, and he always had loyal associates providing cover. In the underground struggle over territory, women, and honor, Nomads leaders trusted Minh Du Tong Nguyen for his recklessness and willingness to use violence. However, that ambition also fractured the gang from within. He began to see himself as the leader of his own faction, which fueled conflict with Din and Min, members of a rival group. In the end, Minh Du Tong Nguyen chose to settle everything for good, leading to the shooting on January 30th, 1989. After the shooting, Minh Du Tong Nguyen quickly left Houston to lie low. He handed day-to-day control of the group to a trusted underling and created the impression that he had left the city earlier. With support from the Nomads network, Minh Du quietly disappeared from Houston, moving discreetly, constantly switching cars, and drifting through multiple states. By August 1989, when he heard about the Vietnamese Marian Days celebration in Missouri, Minh Du formed a new plan. He believed the massive crowd of pilgrims would be the perfect camouflage, an environment where police could not realistically check or screen every individual. It was also a chance for him to reconnect with certain underlings and allies to discuss his next move. And indeed, in Carthage, Minh Du ran into many familiar faces from the criminal world, including Hyung Von Chung. The two fugitives exchanged information about hiding and staying on the run, completely unaware that US authorities had quietly tracked their trail and were closing in at that very location. After being arrested in Canada, Minh Du Tong Nguyen was swiftly extradited back to Houston to face a series of criminal charges. In February 1990, he was transported across the border on a flight from Toronto to Texas under tight supervision by US agents. The moment the plane landed at Houston Airport, Minh Du was turned over to local police and taken straight to the Harris County Jail. By May 1990, the trial of Minh Du Tong Nguyen officially began at the Harris County Court, drawing attention from local media. He was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the deaths of Min and Din, along with attempted murder charges related to the 3 surviving victims. In addition, prosecutors introduced an organized crime element, arguing that the attack was the result of a planned gang retaliation. After many days of arguments, the jury needed only a few hours of deliberation to reach a verdict. Minh Du Tong Nguyen was found guilty of taking the lives of the 2 deceased victims, intentionally attempting to kill the wounded victims, and participating in organized criminal activity. His sentence was handed down in May 1990, bringing an end to a fugitive run that had lasted more than a year. Considering the aggravating factors, the court sentenced Minh Du Tong Nguyen to 45 years in the Texas state prison system, along with a $10,000 fine. In reality, this outcome resulted from an agreement between the prosecution and the defense, reached before the jury considered whether the death penalty might apply. Under the law, for an act that caused multiple deaths, Minh Du could have faced a capital murder charge and the maximum possible punishment. However, prosecutors agreed to reduce the charge to a non-capital murder offense, in exchange for Minh Du accepting the sentence imposed by the court. After sentencing, Minh Du Tong Nguyen's legal team continued by filing an appeal with the Texas Court of Appeals. Even so, in April 1991, the appellate court upheld the trial court's judgment and rejected every argument raised by Minh Du's side. This meant he would spend nearly all of his youth and middle age behind bars, forced to reflect on the crimes he committed. The Tony Playboy Minh Du Tong Nguyen case sent shockwaves through the Vietnamese community in Houston and across the United States at the time. It was regarded as one of the bloodiest Vietnamese gang retaliations ever brought into the light. US media also paid close attention, especially after the case was featured on America's Most Wanted, which made the name Tony Playboy widely recognized by the public. The case served as a wake-up call about the darker side that can exist within immigrant communities, where stories of success may coexist with hidden corners of violence and crime. The Vietnamese community, which had largely kept to itself, was forced to confront a painful reality. Gang violence had seeped into everyday life. After the case, many internal discussions took place, urging parents to pay closer attention to their children to prevent young people from being drawn into gang life early on. To this day, Minh Du has served more than 35 years and is likely still behind bars. The notorious nomad gangster's once flamboyant life has gradually closed in obscurity, serving as a reminder that no matter how far an evildoer runs, justice will keep following the trail, and when a community stands together, the ghost of crime will have nowhere left to hide. And you think a 45-year sentence for 2 lives in this case is harsh enough and truly fair? In April 2011, users in several United States suddenly began receiving suspicious promotional emails. The strange part was that these emails were sent to addresses the users had only provided to major corporations, banks, supermarkets, retail chains, and had never shared publicly. For example, one customer discovered that his secondary inbox used exclusively for a major bank received an email offering to buy Adobe Reader 10, a program that should be free for $65. Meanwhile, another customer of a well-known retail chain received the same spam message at an email address used solely for the store's membership card. A wave of identical complaints alarmed major corporations, leading them to suspect their email marketing service providers had been compromised. And the suspicion turned out to be correct. On April 2nd, 2011, one of the largest email service providers in the United States publicly admitted that its system had been breached, exposing customer email databases belonging to many major brands. An urgent alert was immediately sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Shortly after, FBI Atlanta, the field office responsible for the region where the affected company was located, dispatched cybercrime agents to investigate the digital crime scene. As soon as investigators accessed the company's server environment, they realized the scale was enormous. The hacker had not targeted just one company, but multiple email service providers across the United States. Every footprint the intruder left behind indicated a highly organized, sophisticated attack, carefully obscured. Digital forensic engineers began tracing tiny fragments of evidence, odd IP addresses and server logs, several infected employee machines, and hundreds of gigabytes of data silently exfiltrated. From here, forensic specialists reconstructed the timeline. Beginning in late March 2011, the hacker infiltrated the database and quietly downloaded customer lists from hundreds of major corporations, explaining why customers from completely different companies received the same spam at the same time. The first key findings included: 1. Malware had been installed on an employee's computer, opening a backdoor for the hacker to control the system remotely. 2. The employee's admin credentials were used to access restricted data. And 3. All stolen data had been transmitted to a server located in the Netherlands. The fact that the attacker's server was hosted overseas immediately signaled an international cyber attack far beyond a simple phishing scam. FBI agents grew tense. If the hacker was really operating from the Netherlands or another foreign country, identifying him would be extremely difficult. And indeed, the investigation that followed dragged on for years, enduring countless challenges from analyzing the digital crime scene, tracing technical clues, to coordinating international cooperation to hunt down the offender. At first, investigators believed this might be the work of a large, organized cybercriminal syndicate, simultaneously breaching multiple companies, stealing record-breaking amounts of data, and launching massive spam attacks required significant resources and expertise. However, a bolder theory also emerged, that all of this could have been carried out by a single super hacker. Without enough evidence, investigators refused to rule out any possibility and began working on both fronts. As they examined the digital crime scenes, computer forensics experts from the FBI and the US Secret Service jointly dissected the compromised servers. They discovered the hacker's intrusion method was highly sophisticated. First, phishing emails crafted specifically for employees of targeted companies were sent out. These spoofed emails often contained links to cleverly disguised malicious websites, such as invitations to view wedding photos or greeting cards, tempting employees to click. Once the victim clicked, malware silently installed itself on the computer, stealing passwords and opening a backdoor into the internal network. The hacker then logged in using the employee's legitimate credentials, so no unusual activity was detected at first. From inside, he escalated privileges to access marketing databases and carry out large-scale data theft. Even more cunning, he leveraged the victim company's own infrastructure for the next phase. After stealing customer email lists, he didn't log out. Instead, he used the company's official mail servers to blast spam to the newly stolen addresses. This detail astonished investigators, as it meant the hacker had fully hijacked the systems of reputable email providers. As a result, the spam bypassed filters and was delivered successfully because it originated from legitimate corporate servers. Thanks to these tactics, the attack operated on an enormous scale without detection. Tens of millions of spam emails were sent every day during the period the hacker maintained control of the system. From an investigative standpoint, this discovery was both bad and good news. Bad because it showed how cunning the attacker was, but good because the activity left traceable logs on the victim's own servers, providing clear forensic evidence. Alongside technical forensics, the FBI also interviewed witnesses, employees of the hacked companies, especially those who had unknowingly clicked the initial phishing emails. They provided details about the email content, the time they received it, and what actions they took. The statements were highly reliable since the events occurred directly on their machines. However, a small inconsistency surfaced. At first, some employees believed they were merely victims of an isolated virus attack unrelated to others. Only after investigators shared their findings did they realize they were all pieces of a much larger coordinated scheme. Once the hacker's attack path was mapped out, advanced investigative techniques were deployed to uncover his identity. The FBI's cybercrime division mobilized specialists in online offender identification. Based on patterns of behavior, they drew a preliminary profile, a hacker with deep knowledge of email marketing systems, possibly someone who had worked in the industry or collaborated with insiders. Someone skilled in crafting malware, evading detection, and deploying remote control tools on compromised machines. His choice of a server located in Deventer, the Netherlands, as a relay point also suggested he understood hosting infrastructure and international legal frameworks, since the Netherlands has strong internet infrastructure and relatively tolerant hosting policies. These observations led investigators to suspect the offender was young, around 20 to 30 years old, highly technical, and likely from a country with an active hacker community. The FBI immediately sent a request to the Dutch internet service provider through its legal attaché office in The Hague and the MLAT Mutual Legal Assistance Channel to obtain information about the IP address owner of the suspicious server. However, just as predicted, the server had been registered under a fabricated or vague identity. Even so, the Netherlands agreed to cooperate further. By August 2012, after many months of preparation, the FBI and Dutch police executed a bold operation, raiding the physical server location and the suspected residence of the hacker in the city of Deventer. The raid took place at dawn. A tactical team quietly surrounded a small apartment on the edge of the city, the place where the server's internet subscription was registered. When the door was kicked open, agents rushed in and subdued the people inside. There, they arrested a 25-year-old Vietnamese man named Giang Hoang Vu. Along with Vu, numerous electronic devices, computers, and data-filled hard drives were seized. However, agents were stunned to discover signs that the apartment was the headquarters of at least 2 hackers, and that another individual had likely lived there but escaped or was simply not present at the time. More importantly, that missing individual was highly likely to be the mastermind. Fortunately, after being arrested, Giang Hoang Vu quickly admitted his role as an assistant in the spam operation. He also revealed the identity of someone far more significant, the mastermind, who had vanished. Viet Nguyen, 25 years old, also from Vietnam. Nguyen had lived with Vu for a period in the Netherlands, but before police arrived, he had already left. There was information indicating that Nguyen sensed danger and fled back to Vietnam, where he had family and where no extradition treaty with the United States existed. Although Nguyen had not yet been arrested, Identifying his full identity marked a breakthrough in the investigation. From here, the FBI shifted strategy, targeting the remaining links in the network while applying pressure that would eventually force Nguyen to surface. Expanding the investigation, the FBI discovered that to profit from the stolen email databases, Nguyen and Vu had partnered with a third party. Tracing the money trail from sales of the counterfeit Adobe software, the FBI uncovered an affiliate marketing company called MarketBay.com. This company was based in Canada and co-founded by David Manuel Santos da Silva, a Montreal businessman. MarketBay's affiliate marketing operations were precisely how Nguyen converted the stolen email lists into money. In simple terms, Nguyen sent advertisements to the stolen email addresses. When victims clicked the link, they were redirected to a website built by Nguyen but managed under MarketBay's platform. If a user paid for the software even though it was counterfeit or pirated, MarketBay processed the payment, delivered the product, and paid Nguyen a commission for every successful transaction. To visualize it, it was no different from doing affiliate marketing for Shopee, Lazada, or Amazon, except here, Vu and Nguyen had illegally infiltrated email service systems to steal addresses and send them fake products and services. Realizing MarketBay's crucial role, US authorities continued secretly gathering evidence against Da Silva. Investigators discovered that from 2009 to 2011, Nguyen and Da Silva earned approximately $2 million USD through selling software via massive spam campaigns. Da Silva knew very well that the traffic Nguyen provided came from stolen email databases, but driven by greed, he turned a blind eye and shared profits with Nguyen. By early 2015, once the evidence had been fully reinforced, US authorities decided it was time to act. They secretly obtained an arrest warrant for Da Silva and waited for the right moment. In February 2015, the moment Da Silva stepped off the plane at Fort Lauderdale International Airport in Florida, he was immediately arrested by the FBI. However, Da Silva's arrest was kept strictly confidential until authorities were ready to unveil the entire case. At the same time, another link in the chain was identified Sven Olaf Kamfuis, Sven Fransen, a German businessman living in the Netherlands. He operated the company Certo, Multibill, which specialized in online payment processing services. Investigators discovered that Multibill had processed more than 1.5 million USD in transactions for pirated software distributed by MarketBay, despite obvious signs of fraud and copyright violations. Moreover, Fransen not only turned a blind eye, but even advised Da Silva on how to disguise the true nature of the products when financial partners raised red flags. Clearly, to keep this illegal money-making operation running smoothly, Viet Quoc Nguyen had built an entire cybercrime alliance involving hackers, spam specialists, affiliate marketers, and payment processors. By late 2015, nearly the entire puzzle had been revealed. Giang Hoang Vu had been arrested and confessed. David Santos da Silva and Sven Fransen had been taken down one by one. Only Viet Quoc Nguyen, the mastermind, remained missing. He was the true architect behind the high-tech intrusions, while the others were mostly operators and beneficiaries. In fact, as early as October 2012, a federal grand jury in Atlanta had issued an indictment of 29 criminal counts against Viet Quoc Nguyen, age 28, and Giang Hoang Vu, age 25. But it was not until March 2015 that the indictment was unsealed and publicly released, by which time nearly all the co-conspirators had been neutralized. However, capturing Nguyen remained a massive challenge as he was hiding far outside the reach of US law enforcement. So who is Viet Quoc Nguyen, and how cunning must he be to evade the FBI's pursuit until this very day? According to available information, Nguyen was born in 1987 in Vietnam, which means that when he launched his first attacks in 2009, he was only about 22 years old. There's little information about his family or upbringing, only that he had lived in the Netherlands for a period and may have studied or worked in IT while there. The FBI described Nguyen as approximately 1 meter 83 tall, 90 kilograms in weight, with pitted acne scars on his skin. He was believed to use online aliases such as Peter Wine, Peter Norman, and Van de Heeuw, suggesting he was highly experienced in digital anonymity. Interestingly, in a circulated profile image, Nguyen appeared scholarly and mild-mannered, completely different from the stereotypical image of a cold-blooded cybercriminal. Prior to this case, there was no information indicating he had any criminal record. He lived entirely in the shadows of the internet. This has led to speculation that Nguyen may have been part of a self-taught hacker group that grew out of underground forums. Some even believe he originated from the spammer community, learned how to make money through illegal advertising tactics, and eventually developed larger ambitions. Nguyen's motive appears clear: financial gain. Prosecutors allege that he and his partners earned millions of USD through stolen data and spam campaigns. But more deeply, Nguyen may have been driven by a desire to conquer data fortresses, an ambition that very few hackers dared pursue at that time. Additionally, simultaneously, attacking nearly 10 major US corporations required both recklessness and arrogance, which may have given him a sense of achievement after pulling it off. Giang Hoang Vu, Nguyen's accomplice, was born around 1990. Also Vietnamese, Vu traveled to the Netherlands and collaborated with Nguyen from 2010 to 2012. Nguyen and Vu may have known each other from Vietnam or met online before deciding to work together for profit. Within the group, Vu served as an assistant, helping execute spam campaigns and possibly managing several servers. One of his known aliases was Li Vu. Vu was less skilled and less prominent than Nguyen, but far more unlucky, as he was caught red-handed. The trial unfolded mainly from 2015 to 2017 at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia in Atlanta. There were no intense battles between prosecution and defense, because all defendants who had been arrested had already pleaded guilty under negotiated agreements. The first was Giang Hoang Vu. After pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit computer intrusion in February 2015, Vu awaited sentencing. At the sentencing hearing on 27 July 2015, Judge Timothy C. Batten Sr. considered Vu's cooperation during the investigation. Because Vu had substantially helped expose the entire network, prosecutors recommended a sentence below the guideline range. In the end, the court imposed 24 months in federal prison, a lighter sentence than many had expected. Public reaction was largely positive, with many viewing the sentence as a textbook example of leniency granted in exchange for crucial information in a high-tech crime case. As for David Manuel Santos da Silva, he was charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering and faced up to 20 years in prison. In court, prosecutors detailed da Silva's role, explaining that he knowingly profited from funds derived from criminal hacking activity. Initially, da Silva refused to plead guilty, but later, likely influenced by his defense counsel, he changed course and entered a guilty plea on 2 November 2015. On 14 June 2017, he was sentenced to 51 months in prison, or 4 years and 3 months. The sentence reflected some consideration of mitigating factors. In his final statement, da Silva expressed remorse, apologized to victims, and admitted his mistake in blindly chasing profit. Sven Olaf. Sven Fransson also faced a conspiracy to launder money charge similar to da Silva, though his case was handled later. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 months in prison on 11 December 2017. During sentencing, prosecutors emphasized that Fransson had facilitated laundering more than 1.5 million USD, despite repeated warnings about the illegality of the transactions. The forfeiture of his assets, including his home and yacht, demonstrated that he had profited substantially from the criminal scheme. However, because the defendant was already 53 years old, his attorney sought leniency on health grounds, and Fransson had accepted responsibility for his actions. Ultimately, the judge imposed a 2.5-year sentence sufficiently deterrent, yet not excessively harsh for a defendant who had cooperated. Meanwhile, Viet Quoc Nguyen remains a fugitive, and the court has issued a warrant for his arrest. The charges against Nguyen are extremely serious: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, fraud, identity theft, and more. 29 counts in total. If convicted on all charges, Nguyen could face decades in prison, potentially 40 to 50 years. Prosecutor Leslie Caldwell once declared that the government was determined to bring Nguyen to justice in the United States. After the case became public, the phrase, "hack 1 billion emails," flooded US. Media from Reuters and AP to technology outlets like Wired and Krebs & Security. Many newspapers even called it the largest email theft in history. Nearly a dozen US companies were direct victims of the attack. First and foremost was Epsilon, the world's largest email marketing provider, managing email programs for hundreds of major brands, including Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, Kroger, Walgreens, Marriott. Founded in 1969, Epsilon was considered the email treasurer of the United States, storing massive data sets containing names, email addresses, and customer information for countless corporations. The nature of its work required the highest levels of security. Yet, ironically, it also made the company an extremely attractive target for hackers. At the time of the attack, Epsilon had been preparing for its spring 2011 marketing campaigns, but was forced to halt all operations to recover from the breach. As a result, Epsilon's reputation suffered severely, clients lost confidence, and the company had to spend substantial sums to help corporate customers notify millions of end users about the incident. Following Epsilon were 8 smaller companies scattered across various US states. Most of these were mid-sized businesses specializing in bulk email services for corporate clients. In total, from these companies alone, more than 1 billion email addresses fell into the hands of criminals. With such data, malicious actors could launch highly sophisticated phishing campaigns or sell the information on the dark market, turning the stolen emails into targets for countless future scams. The case also served as a powerful warning. First, for businesses. The security of what seems like just email data must never be underestimated. A single vulnerability, such as an employee clicking the wrong link, can trigger a catastrophe for an entire system. Organizations must build a culture of vigilance, conduct regular security testing, and maintain clear, practiced incident response protocols. Second, for individual users, be cautious with your personal information, even something as simple as an email address. Use different email accounts for different purposes to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket. And when receiving emails, even from familiar senders, always verify signs of phishing before following any instructions. Now, 10 years later, a full decade has passed. Viet Quoc Nguyen remains completely invisible, as if he vanished from the face of the earth. The FBI continues to keep an active warrant for him and asserts that Nguyen will be brought before a US court the moment he is caught. So what do you think? Where has he gone? Could he have returned to Vietnam and quietly joined other cyber operations? In early 2020, a bank employee in Houston began noticing a string of unusual transactions. Day after day, unfamiliar individuals repeatedly showed up to deposit large amounts of cash, often just under the 10,000 USD mark, into multiple different business accounts. Each deposit stayed below the mandatory reporting threshold, but the high frequency and repeated pattern made it increasingly suspicious. Based on professional experience, the employee recognized this as a possible sign of structuring, breaking up cash flows to evade oversight. Without hesitation, a suspicious activity report was quickly forwarded to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Around the same time, in Dallas, several hundred kilometers from Houston, agents from a drug enforcement unit traced leads to a mysterious married couple living in Houston. According to gathered intelligence, the pair were suspected of specializing in converting cash into clean money for opioid trafficking networks in the area. As these two streams of information, one from the financial system and one from the criminal underworld, were placed side by side, a shared suspicion began to form. An underground bank might be operating in the heart of Houston, with a couple running it from behind the scenes. A joint interagency investigation was quickly launched, involving the South Texas Financial Task Force. As the first reports came in, investigators rapidly realized just how serious the case was. A massive cash flow reaching tens of millions of USD was moved through the banking system and cryptocurrency in an organized and carefully calculated way. Numerous bank accounts under different individuals and businesses' names repeatedly received cash deposits and then quickly transferred the money elsewhere. The group used multiple cash couriers to deposit money into more than 9 different accounts, helping them avoid drawing attention. From these accounts, the funds were used to purchase cryptocurrency, then sold and withdrawn as cash in other states, creating multiple overlapping layers of concealment. Tracing the flow of money, investigators reviewed business registration records in Texas and discovered a striking point of convergence. Many of the companies appearing in the suspicious financial network were linked to 2 names, Vinh Quang Phan, age 56, and his wife, Diana Lay Phan, age 44, both living in Houston. From that point on, the couple quickly became primary targets, suspected of serving as the central coordinators of an unlicensed money transmitting operation tied to money laundering on a scale of tens of millions of USD. As soon as Vinh Quang Phan and his wife were identified as key suspects, a detailed investigative plan was drawn up. Early assessments by authorities suggested this was a professional laundering ring operating under the cover of an unlicensed underground money transfer business. Investigators suspected that Vinh Quang Phan and Diana Lê Phan served as coordinators, directly managing the receipt and movement of cash for criminal organizations. On that basis, the interagency team sought court orders to review the transaction histories of numerous bank accounts and related cryptocurrency wallets. In total, 40 search warrants were executed, spanning bank data, cryptocurrency exchanges, and the suspects' homes and workplaces. In parallel, more than 20 financial institutions and cryptocurrency companies were compelled to provide years' worth of transaction records for comparison and analysis. To clarify how the money moved, investigators built a detailed flowchart mapping the entire journey of the dirty money from its starting point. The money began as cash from narcotics gangs, flowed into the hands of the Phan couple, moved through a web of bank accounts, was converted into cryptocurrency, sent to California, and ultimately returned to the bosses behind the drug trafficking operation. According to the investigation, Vinh Quang Phan and Diana Lê Phan received cash from multiple sources. From one Dallas-based drug trafficking group led by Brandon Denver Richards alone, the transferred amount reached at least $9 million USD. To conceal the flow, they used more than 9 mules, people whose names were used to open bank accounts, and then structured the deposits into smaller amounts to avoid reporting thresholds. From these accounts, the money was quickly withdrawn or used to purchase cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin through multiple exchanges. Next, that cryptocurrency was sold for cash in California, right where the narcotics supply originated. In other words, once the money had been cleaned, it flowed back to pay for the original product. This multi-layered process, constantly changing form, made tracing the trail especially difficult because the funds moved through too many intermediary accounts and kept transforming. To strengthen the evidence for prosecution, investigators began deploying a range of modern techniques. Big data analysis was used to review and cross-check thousands of transactions, gradually revealing patterns and connection points among accounts that initially appeared completely unrelated. In parallel, electronic surveillance was also conducted. Location data from key suspects' phones showed repeated trips between Houston and Dallas, or between Houston and California, often matching the timing of major transactions, demonstrating a hard-to-deny link between them and the network. On another front, records obtained from cryptocurrency exchanges provided images and identification documents of the individuals who opened the accounts. Even though the Phan couple tried to hide their identities by using company names or having others act as account holders, investigators still traced the trail through signatures and registered email addresses, everything leading back to the same 2 suspects. During the review, one notable detail unexpectedly emerged. Investigators discovered that the couple had been robbed of as much as $440,000 USD in October 2019. From there, they realized that this incident forced the suspects to switch to cryptocurrency and unintentionally left behind even more electronic traces for authorities to follow. In a sense, it was the perfect example of you reap what you sow. Criminals harming one another while law enforcement gained a crucial lead to complete the case file. Beyond technical evidence, witness and accomplice testimony also played a key role in solidifying the prosecution's case. One courier testified that he had been instructed by a woman named Sam to open a bank account and deposit cash under his name in exchange for only a few hundred USD each time. This detail quickly put the name Sam on investigators' radar. Verification showed that the woman's full name was Nhiemthi Dan Nguyen, age 49, currently living in Arlington, Texas. After her arrest, Sam Nguyen initially tried to evade and deny responsibility. However, faced with undeniable evidence, she agreed to cooperate with authorities in hopes of leniency. That cooperation opened a critical link. Sam admitted she managed multiple couriers and regularly communicated directly with Diana Phan to receive instructions. Not only that, she described in considerable detail how the Phan couple ran the operation. According to her testimony, Vinh Quang Phan personally met and collected cash from various sources, including Richards' group in Dallas. Diana Phan then worked with Sam to organize the manpower to deposit money into bank accounts and carry out cryptocurrency buying and selling transactions. Everything Sam described matched the data investigators had already collected, helping complete the full picture of how the money laundering scheme operated. Once the key evidence was firmly established, the task force began calculating the right moment to move in. The arrest plan was prepared carefully because the targets were not concentrated in one place. The Phan couple lived in Houston, while the Richards group operated in the Dallas area. This required coordinated action on multiple fronts to prevent suspects from escaping in time or destroying evidence. Before dawn on April 21st, 2021, federal task force agents launched a simultaneous takedown. In Houston, agents quickly surrounded the spacious two-story home of Vinh Quang Phan. The ringleader couple were subdued and arrested on the spot before they could react. At the same time, in the Dallas area, Brandon Richards and two accomplices, Douglas Paul, Michael Davis, and Michael Dean Richards, were also captured one by one. Within just a few hours, the entire network had been dismantled, and the defendants were brought directly before a federal court to begin prosecution. In parallel, searches of the Phan couple's residence revealed a notable scale of assets. Agents seized all electronic devices, approximately 16,000 USD in cash, and froze more than 470,000 USD across related bank accounts. In addition, the couple's luxury home in Houston was seized. All assets determined to have originated from illegal activity were later ordered forfeited by the court and transferred to the public treasury. After a long and meticulous investigation, the operation concluded cleanly. The ringleaders were brought into the light without a single shot being fired. So who were these Vietnamese-born suspects, and what drove them onto a criminal path? To answer that, we need to look back at their background and past, from a life that seemed ordinary and comfortable to the moment they slipped deeper into the high-risk world of money laundering. Vinh Quang Phan, age 56, and his wife, Diana Le Phan, age 44, were living in the Houston area. Vinh Phan was known as a Vietnamese immigrant who had lived in the United States for a long time, while Diana Le Phan became a US citizen only after marrying him. Records indicated that Vinh and Diana owned a valuable private home in Houston and most likely lived off independent business activities or accumulated investments from earlier years. Court proceedings showed that the couple had once achieved a lifestyle often described as the American dream before becoming entangled in crime. This suggested they did not break the law because of hardship or desperation. Their primary motive was greed. Before the case was exposed, neither had a criminal record, and neither was a name that had appeared in headlines or in criminal files. As for personality, the case file suggested that Vinh Quang Phan was calculating and fairly reckless. He was willing to drive while carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash across multiple states, an act that was both illegal and extremely risky. In fact, the earlier robbery showed just how dangerous that choice could be. Meanwhile, Diana Le Phan appeared to take charge of bookkeeping and online transactions. The fact that she was additionally accused of a separate money laundering count apart from the broader conspiracy suggested that Diana directly participated in certain illegal financial transactions. From these details, it is possible that Diana was the one with the technical know-how operating behind the shift to cryptocurrency-based laundering after the robbery, as she also had a certain level of familiarity with finance. The couple's path into crime began to take shape in early 2019, when Vinh Phan became involved in off-the-books money transfers for people who did not want to go through the banking system. In the early stage, the transaction volume was only in the tens of thousands of USD. However, the profits came quickly and easily, and Vinh realized this was a lucrative opportunity to become a laundering middleman. The real turning point came when the Phan couple agreed to work with a Dallas-based drug trafficking group led by Brandon Richards. That group needed to legitimize cash amounts in the millions of USD and then move the funds to California to support their operations. To meet that demand, the Phan couple quickly built a relatively structured laundering system. They registered multiple shell companies in Texas, opened numerous bank accounts under both business and individual names, and recruited or paid others to open additional secondary accounts. At the same time, they created accounts on major US-based cryptocurrency exchanges and completed identity verification procedures. However, the couple deliberately did not obtain a money services business license, seeking to avoid closer oversight. The entire system was operated illegally, with the sole purpose of servicing money generated from drug trafficking. In the beginning, the network's laundering method was still crude and carried significant risk. Vinh Phan repeatedly transported cash himself, traveling across state lines to deliver it to partners in California. In October 2019, that risk erupted into a major incident when the fan couple were ambushed by an armed robbery crew who took as much as $440,000 in cash. The incident was a major shock, forcing the entire network to reassess how it operated and to consider changing tactics. Moving into early 2020, the fan couple pivoted to a more sophisticated laundering model, combining the banking system with cryptocurrency. Under Diana Fan's coordination and with support from Sam Wyan, mules were deployed to break up cash into deposits below the 10,000 USD threshold and place them into multiple accounts. From there, the money was sent to cryptocurrency exchanges to buy Bitcoin or stablecoins, then moved onward to accounts in California and sold for cash. This closed-loop cycle allowed money originating from drug trafficking to return to suppliers under a legitimate-looking cover, while the fan couple earned commissions ranging from 3 to 5% per transaction. Over roughly 21 months of activity, the network run by the fan couple laundered more than 33 million USD for multiple criminal organizations. Of that amount, at least 9 million USD was directly tied to the Dallas drug trafficking group led by Richards. Repeated early successes made the couple increasingly confident and increasingly greedy. But that same complex electronic transaction system left clear traces, allowing investigators to follow the trail link by link. After their arrests, Vinh Quang Phan, Diana Le Phan, and their accomplices were brought for prosecution in the U.S. federal court for the Southern District of Texas. By October 2021, a lengthy indictment containing a total of 11 counts was formally approved by a federal grand jury, marking a major shift as the case entered the trial phase. According to the indictment, the key charges included money laundering conspiracy, conspiracy to conduct financial transactions involving illegally sourced assets, operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, and multiple specific money laundering acts. Diana Le Phan was additionally charged with a separate, standalone money laundering count, apart from the broader conspiracy. Each count carried its own maximum penalty. Notably, the money laundering conspiracy charge alone could carry up to 20 years in prison, while the charge of conspiring to operate an illegal money transmitting business carried a maximum sentence of 5 years. With that many allegations, in theory the fan couple faced the risk of decades behind bars if convicted on every count. However, the proceedings took a different turn when both defendants chose to plead guilty in exchange for leniency. At a federal court hearing in Houston on June 18, 2024, Vinh Quang Phan and Diana Le Phan jointly admitted to the principal charges related to money laundering and operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. Their guilty pleas spared them a lengthy courtroom battle and opened the possibility of reduced sentencing. Before that, the remaining links in the network had also seen their legal cases resolved. Brandon Richards, identified as the leader on the narcotics side, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Two accomplices, Douglas Michael Davis and Michael Dean Richards, each received 2-year prison sentences. Notably, Sam Nguyen, considered the fan couple's right-hand figure, had pleaded guilty in October 2021 and awaited sentencing. Because she cooperated with authorities, she was sentenced to 40 months in prison, equivalent to 3 years and 4 months in April 2025, a term widely viewed as significantly lighter than those of the other defendants. The sentencing hearing for the fan couple took place in December 2024 in a solemn atmosphere. Before the court, the judge heard arguments from the defense attorneys representing Vinh and Diana. The defense likely emphasized that their clients were first-time offenders, had shown some degree of cooperation with authorities, and had family obligations to support. However, the judge rejected those arguments. He described it as one of the least sympathetic cases he had ever encountered when considering the economic factor, implying that the couple was not in hardship and had no legitimate reason to justify their greed. In the end, after weighing the full record and relevant circumstances, the court sentenced Vinh Quang Phan and Diana Le Phan to 10 years in prison each. The sentence was considered quite severe, yet still within the plea agreement range, and reflective of the nature and seriousness of their conduct. In addition to prison time, each defendant was also ordered to pay a 40,000 USD fine, bringing the total fines to 80,000 USD. The court also ordered the forfeiture of all related assets, including their home in Houston, approximately 16,000 USD in cash seized on site, and more than 470,000 USD in frozen bank accounts. In total, the assets forfeited to the public treasury exceeded 486 USD, considered the price paid for years of money laundering. Even so, that figure was still far too small compared with the 33 million USD the network had cleaned to keep multiple criminal systems across the United States alive. And it did not end there. After serving their prison terms, the fan couple would also face an additional 3 years of supervised release to help prevent reoffending. Notably, the court allowed both of them to remain out on bond until their surrender date. This decision likely reflected that they had complied with all requirements throughout the proceedings and were not considered a high flight risk. Even so, the verdict was final, and leaving their family to begin time in federal custody was only a matter of time. In the related proceedings, besides the fan couple, other accomplices in the network also received their own sentences. On April 8, 2025, Niem Thi Dun Nguyen was sentenced to 40 months in prison for serving in what was seen as a deputy leader role within the laundering system. In sentencing, Judge Ellison emphasized that Sam Nguyen was not merely following instructions, she also directly managed others within the conspiracy, acting deliberately rather than by accident. Her lighter sentence was largely due to her cooperation and her early guilty plea. In this way, all 6 defendants in the money laundering case were convicted, closing the criminal accountability process for the entire network. The Vinh Quang Phan Diana Le Phan laundering case became a warning bell in the fight against modern money laundering and financial crime. From a social perspective, the case shows that any act of enabling drug crime leaves serious consequences. Through this laundering network, millions of USD in dirty money were legitimized, allowing criminal organizations to continue and expand their operations. That, in turn, means more communities facing increased risk of addiction, violence, and other long-lasting harm. For that reason, when the network was dismantled, public opinion and the media expressed support for law enforcement's efforts. What do you think about the 10-year prison sentence for this couple? Around October 2021, during a routine sweep of online black market forums, the Anti-Illegal Substances Task Force in Omaha, Nebraska, discovered a storefront showing suspicious signs. This vendor operated under the name DIRTYRUGS, a name that sounded harmless at first glance but was in fact advertising a wide range of illegal substances. On the black market, DIRTYRUGS promoted a variety of products, from methamphetamine to cocaine, with a significant volume of transactions. Notably, the seller claimed to ship to all states across the United States, including Nebraska. This detail quickly triggered a covert investigation aimed at identifying the individual behind the suspicious account. To gather evidence, investigators decided to pose as buyers and place a test order from DIRTYRUGS. Communication was conducted discreetly through an encrypted mobile messaging application, exactly as instructed by DIRTYRUGS for customers. Shortly afterward, the seller responded and accepted the transaction, leaving the agents both anxious and tense as they realized they had taken their first steps into a highly risky underground network. When the first package was delivered to a covert address in Nebraska, investigators immediately took action. From the initial inspection, they could already sense the complexity of the case through the calculated delivery method. The package was meticulously sealed, with a cleverly fabricated return address on the outside, leaving almost no trace of any personal information. The agents approached the package with extreme caution, wearing protective gear and using specialized equipment to screen for explosives or traps before opening it. Inside, the packaging once again reflected the professionalism of whoever was behind it. The illegal substances were wrapped in multiple layers and tightly vacuum sealed to avoid detection by K9 units, then further disguised with ordinary household items. Every small detail indicated that the person behind this storefront was no amateur, but someone with deep technical knowledge and real experience in evading law enforcement. Then, beneath what looked like ordinary wrapping paper, officers found plastic bags filled with shimmering white crystals. A field test quickly confirmed it was high-purity methamphetamine. The total amount of crystal meth seized across 4 controlled test orders exceeded 50 grams, enough to confirm the operator was not a small-time dealer. Alongside securing the evidence, agents carefully analyzed the cardboard box, postage label, sender information, and postal markings. The data indicated the packages were mailed from the Los Angeles area in California. Notably, the postmark strongly suggested the shipment originated from a post office in Culver City, quickly putting that location on investigators' radar. However, in the early stage, the investigation faced significant obstacles in identifying the person behind the Dirty Rugs account. On online black markets, everything is concealed behind anonymity, from sellers to buyers, with all communication limited to aliases and payment made via cryptocurrency. On top of that, the seller used encrypted messaging applications on smartphones, making it particularly difficult to trace an IP address or GPS location. The turning point came from a bold idea proposed by the agent handling the technology side, going after iCloud. Specifically, believing the suspect used a smartphone to communicate and coordinate transactions, the investigative team hypothesized that key data might have been backed up to iCloud. By tracing electronic footprints, from cryptocurrency transaction records to information linked to shipped parcels, they gradually narrowed it down to a woman in her 30s living in Culver City who was mailing an unusually high number of packages at an abnormal frequency. This indirect evidence was strong enough to persuade the court to issue a warrant for the suspect's iCloud data. When the agents gained access to the account, they were stunned. Inside was a trove of data indicating she was the account holder directly operating the Dirty Rugs storefront on the black market. Customer messages, order notes, and even photos of drug packages being prepared for shipment, everything had been inadvertently saved to the cloud. More importantly, the data finally revealed the real identity the investigative team had been pursuing for so long. It was Helen Nguyen, 31 years old, residing in Culver City, California. She was a Vietnamese-American citizen with a petite build, about 1.52 meters tall, and weighing roughly 59 kilograms. Before her arrest, Helen lived in a typical rented apartment and was described by neighbors as fairly private, rarely socializing, and seldom drawing attention. There was almost no publicly available information about her employment. Investigators believed her primary income most likely came from online drug trafficking. Directly operating a storefront on the black market showed that Helen had a certain level of technological know-how, as well as an understanding of how to conduct transactions using cryptocurrency. The iCloud data also indicated that Helen was not working alone. She had an accomplice in his 30s named James Lau, a Chinese man who helped prepare and ship the packages. Exactly where the relationship between Helen and James Lau began remains unclear. It is possible they knew each other through underground connections tied to illegal substances, or were introduced by an intermediary within the supply chain. The investigation quickly accelerated after the identities of Helen Nguyen and her accomplice, James Lau, were confirmed. With both individuals identified, the task force launched covert surveillance in California. Helen's home in Culver City, along with James's residence in another area of the state, were placed under close watch. Every movement, every visitor, and all mailing activity were systematically recorded. At the same time, all previously collected physical evidence was thoroughly analyzed. The envelopes and postage stamps used on the parcels were compared against stamp batches sold at the Culver City post office. The results showed that the serial numbers on the stamps matched the batch sold at the exact time Helen mailed the packages, making this a key piece of evidence in confirming where the orders had been sent from. Authorities also examined fingerprints on the tape used to seal the parcels. However, the results offered little value because the suspect frequently wore gloves during packaging. Even so, a seemingly minor detail opened up a new lead: a thin strand of hair that had accidentally stuck to the tape. DNA analysis showed the hair belonged to an Asian woman and matched a sample collected from the trash bin outside Helen's home. Although only supporting evidence, these clues helped reinforce the conclusion that the task force's investigative direction was entirely correct. In parallel with field surveillance, agents gathered and strengthened all electronic evidence, including transaction history on the Dirty Rugs storefront, buyer-seller communications, and cryptocurrency transfer records. These datasets were cross-checked against the iCloud information seized earlier, gradually building a complete picture. According to the investigation, Helen was the one directly handling orders on the black market, while James was responsible for preparing certain drugs, such as cocaine, ecstasy, and sedatives, to supply to Helen. As for methamphetamine, Helen sourced it herself, packaged it, and shipped it out. Every stage was tightly organized with the goal of concealing both of their identities as much as possible. Investigators also considered the possibility that Dirty Rugs was part of a larger criminal group. As a result, several other potential suspects in the area were reviewed. However, the deeper the investigation went, the more the evidence converged on Helen and James, with no indication that any other mastermind existed. By June 2022, once the case file had been fully strengthened, investigators decided to move into the action phase. On June 2, 2022, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nebraska formally approved federal charges against Helen Nguyen and James Lau and issued emergency arrest warrants. Immediately afterward, a coordinated simultaneous arrest plan was put into motion. At 6 a.m. on June 8, 2022, two surveillance teams launched operations at two separate locations in California. The first team, coordinating with the Los Angeles Police Department, positioned officers outside Helen's residence in Culver City. As Helen opened the door and stepped toward her car to leave, agents moved in at once, blocked the vehicle, and quickly took her into custody. At the same time, the second team entered James Lau's residence to execute a search warrant. James was arrested in his bedroom, where multiple bags of white powder and various pills were still scattered around him. Immediately after the arrest, authorities began searching the scene. The results significantly reinforced the case. In Helen Nguyen's vehicle and apartment, police found a small amount of methamphetamine, along with multiple bottles of Adderall and Xanax, prescription drugs commonly abused, as well as Pharmapram, a smuggled sedative form of alprazolam. All of these items matched the product list that the Dirty Rugs storefront had previously advertised on the black market. Notably, at Helen's residence, police discovered a large set of tools used for packaging and shipping, including envelopes, cardboard boxes, tape, a vacuum sealer, postage stamps, and lists of recipient addresses. These were all hallmark items associated with black market transaction. Her workroom looked like a miniature business office, complete with a desk, a laptop, a label printer, and shelves stacked with pre-addressed envelopes, exactly as described in FBI materials outlining how black market drug vendors typically operate. There was no doubt anymore. Helen had turned her own home into an operational hub for online drug trafficking. Around the same time, at James Lau's home, authorities seized approximately 1 kilogram of cocaine, along with hundreds of ecstasy tablets and counterfeit Adderall pills. Investigators identified this as the inventory James had stockpiled to supply Helen for packaging and shipment to customers. Police also found a digital scale, a pill press, and multiple tools used to manufacture counterfeit pills, indicating James may have been producing these drugs himself to supply the broader operation. After being taken to a DEA facility, James Lau unexpectedly agreed to cooperate with investigators. During an interview conducted later that same day, James admitted that he and Helen had participated in illegal drug trafficking. He stated that his role was to source cocaine, ecstasy, and sedatives through contacts in the local criminal underworld, while methamphetamine was handled solely by Helen. James also said their partnership operated on a fairly straightforward, business-like basis. Helen directly asked him to obtain supplies, and in return, profits were clearly shared. James knew Helen distributed the products through online black markets, but did not understand the operational technicalities. He simply delivered the drugs to her so she could move them onward for sale. From this statement, it was clear that Helen held the role of coordinator and decision maker, while James largely followed instructions. This information fully aligned with the evidence gathered earlier, further reinforcing Helen's central role in the operation. With the successful arrests of the involved suspects and the collection of complete physical evidence and testimony, the investigation, spanning nearly 1 year, officially came to a close, ready to move into the prosecution phase under the law. Both cases were filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska. By July 2022, a federal grand jury issued a formal indictment, charging Helen Nguyen and James Lau with conspiracy to distribute illegal substances, along with several related counts. Faced with the overwhelming volume of evidence provided by investigators, from seized contraband and electronic data to James's statements, Helen's attorney concluded that the chances of a successful defense were virtually non-existent. In that context, Helen chose to plead guilty under a plea agreement with prosecutors. In exchange, the prosecution agreed to drop some lesser charges and recommend a sentence at the lower end of the typical guideline range. James Lau made a similar choice, hoping for leniency in light of his cooperation during the investigation. Because the defendants pleaded guilty, the case did not need to proceed through a lengthy adversarial process or a jury trial. Even so, the court still held plea and sentencing hearings to determine the appropriate punishment. At James Lau's sentencing hearing on January 4th, 2024, he showed clear remorse. Defense counsel emphasized that his client played a secondary role, had been drawn in by Helen, and had actively cooperated with investigators. After considering the circumstances, the federal judge sentenced James to 47 months in prison, nearly 4 years. This was considered a relatively light sentence compared to the potential sentencing range, indicating the court credited the defendant's cooperation. Next came the sentencing of Helen Nguyen, held on February 21st, 2024, at the federal courthouse in Omaha, Nebraska. In the courtroom that day were prosecutors, defense counsel, and several agents who had worked the case. Helen was escorted into court in an orange jail uniform, her face showing clear exhaustion after months in pretrial detention. When given the opportunity to address the court, Helen lowered her head, accepted responsibility, expressed remorse, and admitted that her actions had harmed society. She asked the judge for leniency so she could return home sooner and rebuild her life. Defense counsel argued that Helen was a first-time offender, faced significant family hardship, and had pleaded guilty in good faith, urging the court to consider a reduced sentence. However, the prosecution remained firm in seeking a strict punishment. According to their argument, the defendant's dark web operation was highly sophisticated, distributing large quantities of dangerous illegal substances across the United States and posing a direct threat to community safety. Prosecutors emphasized that although Helen did not personally use violence, black market crime is a serious danger, and failing to punish it firmly would set a bad precedent for other offenders. After hearing both sides, the judge stated that the court acknowledged the defendant's remorse, but because the conduct was organized and carried out over an extended period, it required a sufficiently strict term of punishment and rehabilitation. At the conclusion of deliberations, Judge Busher sentenced Helen Nguyen to 66 months in federal prison, 5 years and 6 months. In addition, after completing her prison term, she would be subject to 3 years of supervised release under special conditions. The judge also noted that the federal system does not provide parole, meaning Helen would be required to serve nearly the full sentence in custody. Upon hearing the sentence, Helen appeared stunned. However, it is important to emphasize that the sentence had been agreed upon in advance and was significantly lower than the maximum statutory penalty, which could be up to 20 years in prison. In addition to incarceration, the court ordered forfeiture of assets derived from criminal activity. Among them, a large amount of Helen's cryptocurrency, worth tens of thousands of USD, was seized by the government. She was also required to pay a fine and to complete mandatory drug treatment and drug education programs after her release as part of her post-custody supervision. Prosecutors and attending agents appeared satisfied with the final ruling. The case agent stated that the outcome showed justice had been served and sent a clear deterrent message to criminals operating online. As for Helen, she only gave a slight nod in acceptance of the sentence. Throughout the hearing, no family members or friends appeared or were mentioned, further highlighting how alone the female inmate seemed. When the proceedings ended, Helen Nguyen officially became a federal prisoner with her own assigned inmate identification number. By April 2024, she was transferred into the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, closing more than 2 years from the moment the case was first discovered to the court's final judgment. The case of Helen Nguyen running a black market storefront named DIRTYRUGS made a noticeable impact within law enforcement circles and local media. Although it did not cause a nationwide sensation, the case was still considered a representative example of an emerging trend: women participating in high-tech illegal drug trafficking. Media outlets in Nebraska and California particularly highlighted the surprise surrounding the offender's identity. A 31-year-old Vietnamese woman with no criminal record, living in an ordinary residential neighborhood, was able to coordinate distribution of illegal substances to multiple faraway states. This reality forced the public to reconsider familiar assumptions, because dark web crime takes many forms and is not limited by gender, age, or background. That also means a drug kingpin does not necessarily have to be a rough-looking man who is always surrounded by 3 or 4 heavily tattooed henchmen like in the past. It could be a petite Asian woman, barely 1.5 meters tall, spending her days packing orders under a blanket, appearing gentle and harmless, like a sheltered young lady untouched by the real world. The consequences of DIRTYRUGS were also assessed as extremely serious. Many people struggling with stimulant dependence across the United States unknowingly became indirect victims. They received parcels of white powder through the mail, then were gradually pulled into a spiral of poison that severely damaged their lives and triggered tragedies for the families behind them. Every dose of meth or cocaine distributed by Dirty Rugs carried the risk of fueling crime, violence, and even overdose deaths. Illegal substances seeped into everyday life, increasing social instability and posing a direct threat to young people. And the Dirty Rugs case was no exception to that spiral. On online forums, many users expressed concern over the reality that online black markets are creating anonymous criminals hidden in plain sight within ordinary daily life. After the case, many parents in Los Angeles began asking themselves whether their children could be unknowingly drawn into online drug trading like Helen's operation without them realizing it at all. Clearly, this case sounded an alarm about the dark side of technology. The internet can turn a young woman's bedroom into the command center of an entire federal criminal distribution network. Given the scale of the crime and the severe consequences, what do you think was the sentence given to Helen Neuwine strong enough as a deterrent, considering she was the person directly running the headquarters of this operation? In the middle of 2019, a mysterious account named Addy4Cheap suddenly rose to prominence on dark web trading platforms such as Empire Market and Kryptonia Market. On these online black markets, Addy4Cheap advertised a so-called premium orange-colored drug claimed to be genuine Adderall. This is a prescription medication used to treat ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and is classified as a legal psychotropic drug. Of course, unauthorized drugs being funneled onto the dark web was nothing new. What was unusual, however, was that the Addy4Cheap account quickly received hundreds of positive reviews, indicating extremely high sales volume in a short time. But if it were truly selling medication for ADHD, a condition that is not particularly common, how could it possibly sell so rapidly? This anomaly caught the attention of the FBI's high-tech task force in Washington. To verify the situation, federal agents decided to conduct test purchases. From August to December of 2019, the FBI placed 20 orders from Addy4Cheap and received a total of 767 orange pills weighing approximately 268 grams. The forensic results quickly sent chills down the investigators' spines. All of the pills contained methamphetamine, a prohibited and highly addictive substance, rather than the pharmaceutical ingredient Adderall. This meant that a disguised supply of illicit stimulants was quietly poisoning users across the United States. Although the seller was anonymous behind a screen, all of the counterfeit drug packages were shipped through the United States Postal Service. By analyzing postal data and electronic transaction records, investigators were initially able to narrow down the operating area of Addy4Cheap to Northern Virginia, specifically around the Fairfax area. This suggested that the seller was most likely operating locally, rather than from a distant foreign country. This lead was further reinforced by postal security camera footage. A blurry CCTV image showed the silhouette of an Asian man frequently appearing late at night to mail small parcels. The Federal Bureau of Investigation decided to accelerate the investigation, transferring the case to the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. to coordinate with the Fairfax County Police Department and the United States Postal Service. After several months of surveillance, federal authorities decided to strike in the early morning of December 9, 2019. Court-approved search warrants were swiftly executed, targeting residential addresses linked to the Addy4Cheap account. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the task forces simultaneously raided two main locations: an apartment in the Greenbrier area of Fairfax County and another house in Chantilly. The scene left investigators stunned. Inside the Greenbrier apartment, nearly 100 orange pills, identical to the counterfeit drugs the agents had previously purchased, were scattered across the kitchen table and the living room cabinet. At the Chantilly house, police seized a massive quantity of more than 6,000 orange tablets, with a total weight of about 2.2 kilograms, all matching the shape, logo, and color of the fake Adderall pills. The tablets were poorly packaged, some were kept in plastic bags, while others were stored in cardboard boxes labeled as raisins to disguise them during mailing. Clearly, the suspects had tried to use food packaging to fool inspectors. A strong chemical odor hit investigators' noses, mixed with the smell of cardboard from dozens of shipping boxes strewn everywhere. Digital scales, a heat sealer for bagging, fake address labels, bubble wrap, everything indicated that this location had been used as a workshop to package contraband for shipment across the country. In the middle of a picture-perfect residential neighborhood, the suspects had turned the house into a stockpile of addictive drugs ready to spread poison throughout the community. With their investigative experience, officers quickly noted key clues. The quantity seized was significant, but likely not the entirety. This suggested there was still inventory elsewhere, or that much of it had already been sold. In addition, police seized multiple devices, including computers, phones, cryptocurrency wallets, and ledgers listing recipient addresses. These items were sealed as evidence for forensic testing and data extraction. More importantly, the biggest haul from this raid was the suspects themselves. In Fairfax County, police arrested Lian Kim Thi Phan, 37 years old. At the Chantilly scene, Han Lam Luc, 35 years old, was also caught and arrested with the evidence. At the same time, police executed arrest warrants for several other accomplices connected to the group across the area, including Zung Nguyen, 29 years old, in Springfield, Sun Nguyen, 36 years old, in Annandale, Dat Nguyen, 37 years old, in Alexandria, and Triet Huang, 39 years old, in Springfield. All of them were of Vietnamese or Asian origin, living around Northern Virginia. However, in the end, they were merely the hands and feet of the person behind it all. Their statements, though evasive, consistently pointed to one individual, a mysterious ghost known as Tyler Pham. His real name was Pham Thai, born in 1983. He held Vietnamese nationality but had moved to the United States when he was young, living mainly in Northern Virginia. Before the case came to light, Tyler lived with suspect Lian Kim Thi Phan in the Greenbrier house in Fairfax. Neighbors described him as quiet and reserved, with no unusual behavior. It could be said that Tyler Pham lived two parallel lives. By day, he was an Asian resident quietly blending into the community with no prior criminal record. By night, he became an anonymous online trafficker of illegal drugs. On December 27, 2019, the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia issued an arrest warrant for Tyler Pham on charges of conspiracy to distribute 500 grams or more of methamphetamine. However, he had long since vanished. Investigators confirmed that the last time Tyler Pham was seen in the United States was in Northern Virginia, just before the search warrants were executed. So where was he now? To quickly crack the case, the investigative task force mobilized resources and split into two teams working in parallel. The first team focused on forensic analysis of the seized evidence and on taking statements from suspects and witnesses to strengthen the case file. The second team urgently tracked down the fugitive, Tyler Pham. The investigative team's initial assessment after the late 2019 raid was that they were facing a sophisticated cybercrime operation. The counterfeit pills seized at the scene indicated a very large distribution scale. These orange tablets looked identical to prescription Adderall, 30 mg, showing that the group had invested in producing fake pharmaceuticals. Although no manufacturing machinery was found at the scene, the presence of thousands of pills made it clear that this network had a large and stable methamphetamine supply. Federal investigators then began analyzing the seized evidence. Their goal was to trace electronic transactions, identify customer lists, cryptocurrency wallet addresses, and messages on the dark web. Alongside that, forensic results confirmed that the tablets contained methamphetamine mixed with fillers, with a potency strong enough to leave users dazed, explaining why the Addy4Cheap account received so many glowing reviews. Customers thought they were taking a legal psychotropic medication, but in reality, they were getting high on an illegal drug. This became key evidence supporting charges of fraud and distribution of controlled substances against the suspects. In addition, statements from the arrested accomplices greatly aided the investigation. At first, several of them tried to dodge responsibility by minimizing their roles. Lian Phan claimed she was merely a housemate and had no involvement in trafficking. Han Luc said he was only storing a few boxes for a friend. However, contradictions became obvious when their statements were compared with the physical evidence. Police found phone messages between Look and Tyler Famp discussing shipping and today's orders, proving Look's role in packaging and delivery. Faced with the evidence, Look had to admit guilt and cooperate. Similarly, after hearing a secretly recorded voice call between her and Tyler, Leanne Fan also admitted that she had helped her boyfriend hide money from drug sales. Thanks to this cooperation, the full picture gradually became clear. Tyler Pham was the kingpin calling the shots. Dat Wine handled online transactions, Hone Look managed the stash house, and the others assisted with packaging, mailing through the postal service, and laundering money through cryptocurrency. In addition, the FBI also applied criminal profiling techniques. Based on how Tyler Pham operated the Addy4Cheap account, criminal psychologists assessed that the offender was tech-savvy, highly disciplined, and extremely cautious. He maintained fast customer response times and shipped packages early every morning, indicating a fixed daily routine. He also chose Adderall, a brain drug popular among students, as cover for methamphetamine, showing calculation and market awareness. These details suggested that he may have attended college or worked an office job, living an orderly life rather than being a reckless addict. Indeed, records on Tyler Pham indicated that he had once been an information technology student, emigrated to the United States as a teenager, and was highly proficient with computers. This was supported by network data. FBI agents found that the IP address from Tyler's home accessed the dark web during the same time periods when Addy4Cheap was active, circumstantial evidence strongly indicating that he was the operator of the account. On the fugitive tracking front, a breakthrough emerged when the FBI examined immigration and travel records. Tyler Pham had family in Vietnam, and the database showed that in December 2019, he had booked a flight back to Vietnam. He may have planned this move early, because at that time Vietnam did not yet have an extradition treaty with the United States, so fleeing there would greatly increase his chances of escaping prosecution. But immediately afterward, the Federal Bureau of Investigation activated a mutual legal assistance mechanism with Vietnam's Ministry of Public Security through the United States Department of Justice and the Department of State. Interpol also issued a red notice to formalize Tyler's arrest on a global scale. On the Vietnamese side, despite the absence of an extradition treaty, authorities signaled willingness to cooperate. From there, the case file and evidence were translated and sent to Vietnam, including the United States court arrest warrant and proof of criminal conduct. This coordination proceeded quietly and continuously for many months. Law enforcement officials from both countries regularly exchanged information via a hotline. United States agents even flew over multiple times to meet with Vietnamese police to discuss the arrest plan. However, throughout 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, the manhunt became even more difficult. Travel was restricted, and information exchanges between the two countries also slowed as pandemic response took priority. It was not until late 2021, when the situation stabilized, that the investigation reached a turning point. Vietnamese police accelerated covert investigative measures, such as reviewing entry records, filtering individuals with matching names, and conducting checks in the locality where Tyler's family lived. At the same time, the FBI provided additional biometric data on the suspect to Vietnamese authorities. The breakthrough in the final manhunt came from an anonymous witness. This person reported that a middle-aged man frequently appeared at an internet cafe in Ho Chi Minh City, spoke with an American accent, often went online, and had boasted that he had done big business in the United States and just returned. That information was immediately cross-checked against Tyler Pham's file, and the results showed a strong match. From that lead, Vietnamese police quietly narrowed Tyler Pham down among returning overseas Vietnamese in Ho Chi Minh City. After months of surveillance and tracking his movements, by November 2021, they finally identified the hiding place of this ghost. A covert arrest plan was carried out swiftly and cleanly. Early one morning in a quiet alley on the outskirts of Saigon, Vietnamese police suddenly moved in and invited Tyler Pham to the station for questioning. To avoid drawing attention, they did not open a new criminal case locally. Instead, they temporarily detained Tyler Pham administratively, under the pretext of reviewing possible unlawful resident status. After the arrest, they immediately notified the FBI to prepare the handover procedures. This was an extremely sensitive stage. If information leaked too early, the suspect could attempt to delay or contest the transfer by relying on the fact that there was no extradition treaty. But Tyler Pham appeared completely shocked and devastated when he was caught, leaving him no time to mount any legal resistance. The United States government even dispatched a special aircraft to Vietnam to pick up the suspect, and the entire flight crew tested negative for COVID-19 before departure. The handover moment at Noi Bai International Airport on November 16, 2021 was the culmination of a long and arduous investigative journey. In just a few short minutes, the transfer procedures were completed. Tyler Pham officially returned to the custody of United States authorities after 2 years on the run. This cross-border manhunt was praised by the United States Department of Justice as a model of law enforcement cooperation in the era of globalization. The close coordination between agencies successfully stopped a transnational controlled substances trafficker. From the leads collected and the suspect's statements, authorities were able to reconstruct the full sequence of events. In the spring of 2019, Tyler Pham began plotting to make money through the online black market. He planned it together with several trusted Vietnamese friends in the Fairfax area. The group knew that Adderall, a legal psychotropic prescription drug, was popular among students and white-collar workers to boost concentration. Demand was high, but obtaining it legally through a doctor was expensive. So many people turned to the black market. Tyler decided to sell Adderall on the dark web, but instead of the real medication, he used cheap methamphetamine to increase profits. In a discreet rented room in Springfield, Tyler and his accomplices began experimenting. They obtained a quantity of pure methamphetamine powder from a known supplier, bought pill press molds, and purchased orange dye to produce tablets resembling Adderall 30 mg. After several trials, the group managed to manufacture pale orange pills stamped with letters and markings that looked almost identical to genuine Adderall. In May 2019, with help from Dat Nguyen, Tyler Pham created an account on Empire Market. He chose the nickname Addy4Cheap, meaning cheap Adderall, to attract the right target customers. The first batches of counterfeit pills were listed with descriptions like genuine Adderall, peach orange color, strong effects. Buyers had to pay in Bitcoin or Monero, because Tyler chose that method to conceal the money trail. From the very first transactions, Addy4Cheap received many 5-star reviews. Seeing promising signs, Tyler and the others expanded the scale. They also listed the product on Kryptonia Market, another online black market, to broaden their sales channels. Tyler ran the group with strict discipline. Every morning, Han Luk was responsible for packaging the pills in candy boxes, raisin boxes, and other containers for camouflage, while Lian Fan printed fake shipping labels. By afternoon, Tyler or one of his underlings would drive around and drop the parcels into public mailboxes at multiple locations to avoid attracting attention. Day by day, sales soared. In just 3 months, Addy4Cheap completed more than 3,600 transactions on Empire and about 140 transactions on Kryptonia. The proceeds were estimated at nearly $500,000 USD, corresponding to roughly 44,872 pills sold. Those numbers made the group members euphoric they never imagined. Making money could be that easy. Only Tyler was the most cautious. He reminded everyone to keep everything strictly secret, not to show off or spend lavishly, and to avoid unusual purchases that could draw attention. For him, anonymity was the strongest armor. Yet behind the blinding glow of money, darkness had already begun to close in. From August 2019, Addy4Cheap orders entered the crosshairs of a task force. The FBI and its partners carried out multiple covert investigative measures. They purchased pills to secure evidence, tracked the shipping routes of parcels, and even planted a tracking device in one package to trace the GPS signal back to the original mailing drop. Gradually, the net tightened around the Fairfax area. However, Tyler's group still had no idea. They only noticed that by late autumn 2019, business seemed unusually smooth. Many orders were coming from new customers, buying in sizable quantities. In reality, those were bait orders placed by undercover agents. On December 7th, Tyler received a warning email from a dark web account saying that Empire Market might go down. That information may have spooked him. On the night of December 8th, Tyler told Lian that he needed to go away for a few days, and he vanished from that point on. When the FBI raided the location and searched Tyler's bedroom, they found only empty hanger's signs that he had taken his belongings and left. After fleeing Virginia, Tyler Pham carried out the plan he had prepared in advance. Using his Vietnamese passport, he bought a one-way plane ticket back to Vietnam. Because he had not yet been arrested or placed under a travel ban at the time, he was able to board a flight transiting through Seoul and land in Ho Chi Minh City in late December 2019. After arriving in Vietnam, Tyler quietly went to the home of a distant relative and stayed there. He quickly discarded his United States SIM card and bought a new SIM registered under a fake name to avoid being tracked. During his months in hiding, Tyler lived on cash and completely avoided all electronic transactions. He also limited his time outside, only occasionally disguising himself by wearing glasses and a mask to buy necessities. In Tyler's mind, Vietnam felt like a safe haven. And indeed, throughout 2020, no one touched him. The extradition of Vietnamese nationals had almost no precedent. Tyler even began thinking about staying in his homeland long term. However, as 2021 arrived and the pandemic eased, the long arm of transnational justice began closing in on Tyler. In mid-November 2021, Tyler Pham was surrounded and arrested by Vietnamese police, ending his 712-day escape on Vietnamese soil. Back in the United States, Tyler Pham was promptly brought before the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of evidence, Tyler chose to cooperate. At his guilty plea hearing in early 2022, he bowed his head and admitted to everything, creating an account to sell fake Adderall containing illegal substances, shipping the products through the mail, and illegally profiting hundreds of thousands of USD. United States District Judge Leonie M. Brinkema questioned the defendant about the consequences of his actions, emphasizing that his flight had forced the court to wait for justice for 2 years. Tyler murmured a belated apology to the community and his family. On July 12, 2022, the sentencing hearing was held in Alexandria. In the courtroom that day were most of Tyler's accomplices, individuals who had already been sentenced earlier but were summoned to testify. A federal prosecutor presented a summary of the case, emphasizing the danger of distributing methamphetamine under the guise of prescription medication and the international resources expended because of Tyler's escape. Notably, the prosecution also cited shocking figures, stating that Tyler's group had distributed 15 to 45 kilograms of pills containing methamphetamine over a few months, creating an enormous public danger. Tyler's defense seized on mitigating factors such as the defendant being a first-time offender, having pleaded guilty, cooperating with investigators, and expressing remorse. The defense also argued that Tyler was born in Vietnam under difficult circumstances and lacked direction, which contributed to his downfall, hoping the judge would show some leniency. And indeed, after a short recess to deliberate, Judge Brinkema sentenced Tyler Pham, 39 years old, to 52 months in federal prison, about 4 years and 4 months, followed by 3 years of supervised release after he completed his prison term. This sentence was significantly lighter than the 10-year minimum prescribed by law for his offense, showing that the court weighed factors such as his remorse and cooperation. Upon hearing a sentence of just over 4 years, Tyler Pham immediately broke into tears. He repeated his apology and promised to rebuild his life after serving his time. After the hearing ended, Tyler was handcuffed and escorted back to federal custody to serve his sentence. Justice had been carried out. The man who spread the nightmare of illicit drugs received a fitting punishment, even though authorities had to go to extraordinary lengths to bring him before the court. As of December 2025, Tyler Pham has served more than 3 years of his sentence. If he maintains good behavior, he may be released in early 2026. However, it is very likely that after completing his prison term, Tyler Pham will be deported from the United States because he holds Vietnamese nationality and was convicted of a serious felony. And so, he will return to his homeland, the very place he once ironically considered a safe hiding place. That afternoon, T&T Nails had a few regular customers stopping by for beauty services after work. Everyone was busy when suddenly, the salon door flew open, startling everyone inside. A panicked man rushed in and ran straight toward the back of the salon. Close behind him, a stranger chased after him, gripping a handgun. Before anyone could understand what was happening, a series of deafening shots rang out one after another. Quang Tran stood stunned for a few seconds. At first, he thought it was just a prank, like fireworks or something, but the sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder quickly pulled him into a terrifying reality. In that moment of shock, Quang heard the piercing scream of his fiancée, Truk, and sensed something was terribly wrong. He frantically searched for her and saw that Truk had collapsed, blood pouring from her head and soaking her shoulder. By then, the gunfire had stopped. Quang screamed out her name in despair. His heartbreak instantly turned into reckless courage. He charged straight at the gunman. With no weapon in his hands, he used every ounce of strength to fight back against the killer. Fortunately, after a hard strike, the attacker went down. While Quang pinned the suspect to the floor, others in the salon, including Truk's brother-in-law, Thon Howen, and several customers, snapped out of their shock and rushed in to help. They wrestled the gun away from him and held the frenzied attacker down while trying to call 911. A few minutes later, the Baltimore Police Department's rapid response officers arrived at the scene. By then, Truk lay motionless on the floor at the back of the salon, her head still bleeding, her hands smeared with nail polish. A white plastic foot-soaked basin had tipped over, water spilling everywhere and mixing with blood, forming a dark red stream across the glossy tile floor. Around them, several chairs had been knocked over. Nail polish bottles and paper towels were scattered everywhere. The sharp, familiar smell of nail chemicals now mixed with the burnt stench of gunpowder and the heavy metallic scent of blood, creating an indescribably eerie atmosphere. In one corner, several civilians were gathered, restraining a young, muscular man. His clothes were disheveled, and there were a few scrapes on his face and hands. There was no doubt about it, he was the one who caused this tragedy. The on-scene commander immediately signaled officers to handcuff the suspect and escort him to a patrol car, while an ambulance quickly rushed the victims to emergency care. Truk was transported to the nearby Johns Hopkins Hospital, but the gunshot wound that penetrated her head was too severe, and she did not survive. The man who had been chased, later identified as Derek Wallace, 26 years old, was shot multiple times in the back and abdomen, but he was fortunate to survive surgery and remained under intensive care at the hospital. Other officers urgently secured the scene. They found 5 spent shell casings scattered from the entrance stretching deeper into the salon, evidence that the shooter had been running while firing, exactly as witnesses described. Each casing was carefully numbered for later forensic examination. A soot-ringed bullet hole in the plywood wall partition at the back of the salon showed that at least one round had missed its intended target. On a table, investigators also saw a .38 caliber handgun that a bystander had picked up and set down, its magazine completely empty. This was likely the weapon the attacker used during the shooting. Law enforcement's initial impression was very clear. This was not a robbery or a profit-driven killing. It showed signs of a personal vendetta because the attacker had relentlessly chased one man down. In the process, the female victim was tragically struck by a stray bullet. In peacetime, right inside a modest nail salon, gun violence took the life of an innocent woman. Everyone kept asking the same question: what led to this cruel tragedy? According to her family, Truk Thi Le Nguyen, 42 years old, was a petite Vietnamese woman, hardworking, resilient, and full of determination. Born and raised in Vietnam, Truk entered an informal marriage with Quang Truong, then immigrated to the United States with him just a few years before the incident occurred. She had only recently settled in America, hoping to build a better life for her family. In Baltimore, Truk quickly integrated into the Vietnamese community and found work as a nail technician at T&T Nails, owned by her brother-in-law. Nail work requires precision and patience, qualities that suited Truk perfectly. Local customers also grew fond of this Asian woman because she was always warm and welcoming, exceptionally skilled, and genuinely sincere in conversation. In the eyes of her loved ones, Truk was a capable and devoted woman. Even while working hard to make a living, she still made time to care for her young son and keep the family together. She was learning to drive so that she could later find a better job and provide for her child's future. Although the immigration journey was still unfamiliar in many ways, Truk remained optimistic. She believed in the American dream, that as long as she worked diligently and persevered, her family would gradually build a more prosperous and safer life in this land of opportunity. But cruel fate brought violence to Truk's workplace on May 5, 2014, taking the life of a kind-hearted woman in the very moment she was doing the work she loved. Truk's death left an irreplaceable void for her family. Quang Truong lost the woman he loved, their young son lost his mother, and the family lost a devoted daughter far from home. The Vietnamese community in Baltimore was also stunned and heartbroken by the terrible news that a gentle nail technician had been killed senselessly right at her workplace. Notably, the case took place in Baltimore, Maryland, where in 2014, violent crime was a serious crisis, with 211 homicides in just that single year. East Baltimore, especially around Monument Street, was a densely populated working-class community, home to both hard-working immigrant families trying to get by and street gangs settling scores with one another. At that time, the city was striving to reduce crime, yet daytime shootings were still not uncommon, especially in hotspots like East Baltimore. Residents had grown used to hearing police sirens in the distance and even stayed on guard against the risk of stray bullets whenever conflicts erupted. The Vietnamese community in Baltimore was not very large, but it was close-knit, often concentrated in small service businesses such as restaurants, Asian markets, and especially nail salons. Truc Thi Linh Nguyen and her family were no exception. They operated T&T Nails at 2333 East Monument Street, earning an honest living through nail work, a profession widely seen in Vietnamese communities across the United States. Truc had once shared that she truly loved doing nails in Baltimore because customers there were friendly and respected workers despite differences in background. Yet it was precisely in that familiar space that merciless destiny came crashing down on her. Back to the case. The suspect was immediately taken to the police station for questioning. There, his identity was quickly confirmed. His name was Tremaine Washington, 26 years old, a Baltimore resident. Preliminary records showed that Washington had a troubled past. He grew up in a high-crime neighborhood and had ties to street gangs. In the interrogation room, Washington initially stubbornly denied everything, but faced with undeniable evidence and the fact that he had been caught in the act, he eventually bowed his head and confessed. Washington stated that his target was not Truc Nguyen, but Derek Wallace, the man who had been at the nail salon that afternoon. He admitted he ran into the salon only to take care of Wallace over a personal grudge, and that Truc was merely struck by a stray bullet during that pursuit. This confession matched investigators' initial assessment. Police also looked deeper into the relationship between Washington and Wallace and found that the two men had known each other before and that there was likely a conflict tied to street grudges or territory disputes. Authorities did not release specific details, but a later statement from Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby implied that the shooting stemmed from two men using gun violence to settle a personal score. Wallace himself, Washington's primary target later, after recovering, also acknowledged to police that he and Washington had previously had a serious falling out, leaving Washington bent on revenge. And when the two crossed paths that afternoon, Washington acted immediately. He chased Wallace with a gun in his hand. With nowhere else to go, Wallace had no choice but to run into a nearby business to take shelter, hoping Washington wouldn't dare keep going. That place was T&T Nails, owned by Thanh Huyen, Truc's brother-in-law. But overcome with rage, Washington pursued him anyway. Seeing his target running toward the back of the room, Washington raised the gun and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The deafening gunshot jolted everyone. The first bullet tore through the air past the cashier counter and slammed into a product shelf at the back of the salon. Wallace kept running, trying to hide behind a partition. Washington charged forward a few steps and kept squeezing the trigger. The second shot cracked through the air. Its bullet drove straight into Wallace's back, causing him to buckle, then crawl in agony toward the pedicure chairs where Truc was working. The third and fourth shots followed, shattering the salon's usual calm. One bullet hit Wallace in the abdomen, and he collapsed completely. Customers screamed in terror. Some ducked under tables, while others rushed for the door to escape. In that moment of chaos, Truc Nguyen was crouched beside a water basin. Tragically, the fifth shot flew straight toward Truc. In a split second of fate, she only had time to widen her eyes. No words came out. Her body collapsed, blood pouring relentlessly from a fatal wound. Everything happened so fast that her husband, Quang Trun, standing at the counter just a few meters away, didn't even fully grasp what was happening. He was truly stunned only when he saw his wife fall, blood running down her face. As for Washington, after firing the shots, he moved closer to Wallace to check whether he had finished the job. In his frenzy, he likely didn't even notice that he had hit an innocent nail technician nearby. Seeing Washington close in on his target, Quang Trun charged forward. Watching his wife get shot, Quang seemed to lose all control. He threw all his strength into a punch to Washington's head. The sudden blow made the attacker stagger and crash face first onto the floor, the gun flying out of his hand. Washington struggled, but Quang pinned him down using both hands to lock him in place. The man fought violently, kicking and swinging wildly, sending nearby chairs and tables clattering as they knocked into each other. In the middle of it all, Thanh Huynh Truc's brother-in-law rushed from the front of the salon to help restrain the attacker. A few braver customers also stepped in, and together they forced the killer down onto the floor. Washington was completely overwhelmed by the outrage and collective strength of the men protecting their loved ones. He screamed curses, but his arms were twisted behind his back. Blood seeped from the scrapes on his face, but no one showed even a hint of sympathy. About 5 minutes later, the shrill wail of police sirens stopped right outside the salon. Officers stormed in and quickly took over from the civilians, restraining the suspect. Washington was handcuffed and led away in an instant, still muttering something under his breath. In addition to witness statements, investigators also obtained security camera footage from near the nail salon. According to one officer, 2 corner security cameras captured part of the incident, including Washington running along the sidewalk with a gun and rushing into T&T Nails, chasing behind a man believed to be Wallace. The video was grainy, but it was enough to confirm Washington's presence at the scene and the time frame of his attack. With witness testimony, physical evidence from the scene, and surveillance video combined, authorities had more than enough solid grounds to charge Tremaine Washington in the death of Truc Thi Le Nguyen, as well as the shooting that seriously wounded Derek Wallace. Just 24 hours after the crime, Baltimore police announced the case had been clarified and that Washington had been placed in criminal detention. The local community could breathe a partial sigh of relief that a dangerous offender had been arrested immediately. But the pain of the loss would take far longer to fade, especially for the victim's family. After the investigation was completed, the case file involving Truc Thi Le Nguyen was forwarded to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office for prosecution. Tremaine Washington was charged with a series of serious offenses, led by first-degree murder in the death of Truc Nguyen, first-degree attempted murder of Derek Wallace, along with related charges such as assault with a deadly weapon and firearms violations. These charges could have exposed him to a life sentence if convicted in court. During the legal proceedings, to avoid a prolonged trial and reduce risk, Washington's defense attorney negotiated a plea deal with prosecutors. As a result, Washington agreed to plead guilty to 2 charges, first-degree murder and first-degree attempted murder. In return, the prosecution dropped some of the other and recommended a capped sentence rather than life without parole. The plea agreement also spared the victim's family from having to endure a lengthy trial that could reopen their grief. On November 20th, 2015, at the Baltimore County Circuit Court, Tremaine Washington bowed his head and pleaded guilty in the presence of the victim's family. The judge then sentenced him to 40 years in prison. The sentence included 20 years for first-degree murder and 20 years for first-degree attempted murder, to be served consecutively, totaling 40 years without eligibility for early parole. This also meant Washington would spend at least 4 decades behind bars, a steep price for what he had done. At the sentencing hearing, a representative of the prosecution expressed deep sorrow over Truc's senseless death. It was a meaningless act against a woman who had just come to America to seek a better life. She was learning to drive so she could get a better job, Prosecutor Kurt Bjorklund said, emphasizing the enormous loss suffered by the victim's family. Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney, also strongly condemned the defendant's disregard for the law, stressing that using gun violence to pursue personal revenge only leads to tragedy, and expressing hope that the victim's family would one day find peace after their loss. On Washington's side, no family members spoke in court. Before the judge, Washington remained sullen, offering only a belated apology and admitting, "I wish I hadn't done it." That faint apology could not ease the pain of Truc's loved ones. Quang Trung held his wife's memorial portrait and silently cried throughout the hearing. The victim's family said that the 40-year sentence for Washington was acceptable, even though it could never bring Truc back. They expressed hope that Washington would live with regret for the rest of his life, and that this case would serve as a warning to anyone reckless enough to disregard the lives of innocent people. The heartbreaking death of Truc Thi Le Nguyen sent shockwaves through the local Baltimore community, as well as Vietnamese communities across the United States. Local newspapers widely reported the story of a nail salon employee killed senselessly by a stray bullet, emphasizing the victim's innocence. Public outrage erupted over the reckless, lawless actions of Tremaine Washington, a man willing to open fire in broad daylight to settle a personal score, regardless of the danger to the community. The case once again sounded the alarm about gun violence ravaging Baltimore. A personal conflict can escalate into a tragedy that takes an innocent life. For the victim's family, after the trial, Quang Trun and his son held a funeral to say goodbye to Truc. With donations from the community, including Baltimore residents and Vietnamese Americans, Truc's body was returned to Vietnam for burial, so her relatives back home could see her one last time. Before that, a warm memorial service took place right in Baltimore. On May 12, 2014, dozens of people gathered in front of T&T Nails, each holding a white candle. They arranged the candles in a half circle around the words "Love You Forever" truck placed at the salon's entrance. In the soft candlelight and through choked back tears, people stood up one by one to share memories of Truc, of a gentle, hard-working woman who always gave her all for her family and community. The memorial fell silent when her husband, Quang, thanked everyone and promised he would raise their son to grow up well and live a good life. So he would never let down the child's mother, now gone. Today, more than 10 years have passed since the case of Truc Thi Le Nguyen was closed. The perpetrator remains behind bars and will stay there for decades to come, yet the echo of the tragedy still lingers. Whenever people mention this case, Baltimore residents can't help but feel a bitter sadness for a Vietnamese immigrant family pursuing the American dream, only to be met with a nightmare of violence. The incident also forced many Vietnamese-owned nail salons to think seriously about workplace safety, especially in high-crime urban areas. Many salons installed reinforced glass doors and security cameras, and some employees even began carrying pepper spray for self-defense in worst-case scenarios. On a broader level, Truc's senseless death fueled debate over gun control and public safety in Baltimore. The city had seen many similar cases of bystanders killed by stray bullets, and Truc Nguyen's case became a painful example of that reality. The lesson from this tragedy is not only a warning to anyone reckless enough to disregard the law, but also a reminder for everyone to be cautious and prioritize personal safety. For Asian immigrant communities, this case is a reminder that they must work hard to move forward while also staying connected and supporting one another in a foreign environment filled with hidden risks. The T&T Nails case ended with justice served and the perpetrator held accountable, but the pain of Truc's family is something no trial and no sentence can truly heal. All we can do is hope that society learns from this tragedy to prevent such senseless killings from happening again, so that no innocent person like Truc Nguyen will ever have to lose their life in such a devastating way. And you, what lesson do you take from this tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And before you go, don't forget to like and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you won't miss our next compelling cases. Thank you for listening and supporting us. Goodbye, and see you again in tomorrow's episode of Vietnamese Case Files.